seat. Solving a murder mystery. I think we all probably have been in your den, flipping through the channels, and you come across 48 Hours, Dateline, the first 48. You're like, I'm probably not going to watch that. But you begin to watch it. The next thing you know, you're an hour and a half into this murder mystery. Y'all been there? Blenda's already made popcorn. I'm trying to figure out what has happened. The list of TV shows over murder mysteries is almost exhaustive. Our nation, we are interested in solving murder mysteries. When I was in dental school, one of my favorite professors was named Dr. Sam Atkinson. He was a military dentist, prosthodontist. He made dentures, partials. And he taught an elective class during lunch, forensic dentistry. I didn't even know what forensic dentistry was at the time. I was like, I'm going to take this class. But it was a class on how to identify the remains of those who have passed. And obviously he had been in Vietnam and spent many hours identifying the remains of soldiers. And he had told me and the others, you're going to have to deal with this. And I was like, I don't know, I can't imagine I'd ever have to do something like that. But 10 years later, January the 28th, 2008, I received a phone call from a distraught mother. She said, my son has been missing for about 4 or 5 months. And there has been a body found in North Beaumont. The medical examiner is going to contact you. So within the hour, the medical examiner of Jefferson County contacted me and said, I've been informed that you have dental information on this John Doe. Yes, I do. What would you like me to do? I'd like for you to send your information up to the medical examiner's office. Matter of fact, I'll detach a detective. And that happened. Later on, after lunch, the medical examiner called me. And he said, I can't take the exact x-rays that you did. Do you mind if we bring the remains to you? Oh, well, okay. I close at 4 o'clock. So at promptly 4 o'clock, 3 detectives show up in 3 different cars. And they have a box. I didn't know what was going to come out of that box. I was a little apprehensive. But they pulled out a skull. And it looked like the skull of a skull that you would see in a 7th grade biology lab. And I held that skull in my hands, using universal precautions. And we took the x-rays. There was no mandible. It was just the upper jaw. And my father and I, this is before digital x-rays, we had to actually develop them. We took those x-rays, we were looking on the viewing screen, and he and I reviewed it. And we said, yes, this is the remains of John Doe. My first question was, y'all are going to send this to Quantico, Virginia, right, to the FBI lab to verify this? And they're like, no, your word stands. 10 minutes later, on Live at 5 on Channel 6 News, they broke the case. Local dentist identifies body remains. And since then, I've made identification of another body. But he told me, you're going to have to write a letter to the grand jury. So this is a letter that I wrote to the grand jury. And I try to make it sound, the best that I could. But I kept it all these years. It sits in my desk. You know, we don't get very far into the Bible, and we find out that God has given the Israelites instructions on what to do if they found a body. What does the Bible say about unsolved murders? Well, if you turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 21, 1 through 6, it says this: if in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess, someone is found slain, lying in the open country, and it is not known who killed him, then your elders and your judges shall come out, and they shall measure the distance to the surrounding cities. And the elders of the city that is nearest to the slain man shall take a heifer that has never been worked and that has not pulled in a yoke. And the elders of that city shall bring the heifer down to a valley with running water, which is neither plowed nor sown, and shall break the heifer's neck there in the valley. Then the priest, the sons of Levi, shall come forward. For the Lord your God has chosen them to minister to him and to bless in the name of the Lord. And by their word, every dispute and every assault shall be settled. And all the elders of the city nearest to the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the valley. So even in the early times of the Jewish nation, there were plans placed in how to solve a murder mystery. Only a few pages into the Bible, we have a murder. We have a murder on our hands. In Genesis chapter 4, verses 2 through 10, it reads this: Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the first fruit of the ground. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flocks, of their fat and portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. And the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desires is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, Where's Abel? Where's Abel, your brother? And he said, I do not know. And I, my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. So apparently, when Cain became so angry with his brother, and his countenance had fallen, and he rose up and killed his brother, what did he attempt to do? To bury him, hide it, where God couldn't see. But God says, your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. Well, you may be sitting here thinking, well, these are some pretty interesting stories, but I have not committed what? I've never committed murder. I'm doing pretty good. I don't ever expect to commit murder. I want you to think about the book of 1 John. John wrote 5 books. He wrote the book of John, 1st and 2nd, 3rd John, and then the book of Revelation. But there's two books in the New Testament that do not identify the writer. Hebrews is one of them. Some say Paul wrote it. Others think Apollos may have wrote it. But John doesn't identify himself as the author of 1 John. It just starts off with his thoughts. And in the book of 1 John, there is very little historic information, almost really none, that helps you date when John wrote the book. Some seem to think that John wrote this little small epistle towards the end of his life. Some would think he wrote it when he was older, but not when he was in his 90s. He probably wrote it more in his 60s or his 70s. What makes the book of John difficult is to date is because he just does not give specifics. Luke, when he writes, he's very specific. When you look at the book of Luke and Acts, he's telling you about so-and-so's a proconsul here, and he's the high priest here, and he's the governor here. And so it's very easy when you read the book of Luke and Acts to figure out exactly when and where he is talking. But John, in his writing, he sees a universal problem that spans a universal time. And he writes about it. John deals with loving one another. And he discusses it in 3 different sections of the book of 1 John. What I would like for you to turn in your heavenly libraries, as Phil Robertson says, is to 1 John chapter 3, verses 11 through 15. And here John is dealing with the topic of loving your brother. And John says this in 1 John chapter 3, 11 through 15. But we're really going to look at 11 and 12 and then verse 15. For this is a message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We should not be like Cain, who was the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brothers were righteous. Now skip down to verse 15. Everyone who hates his brother is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. Some commentators think that what has happened in the churches is that there has been this division in the first century. Now, for those commentators that think that John wrote this at the end of the first century, they're going to tell you the problem that has arose in the church is this concept of Gnosticism. And that's a big word, difficult for me to pronounce, especially after I've had mouth surgery. But the concept of Gnosticism became very prominent in the 2nd century. But its origins and its roots started somewhere in the 1st century. And what happened to churches is that they believed that those that subscribed to this concept of Gnosticism, they thought, well, it taught that physical matter is inherently evil, but the spirit of the man is good. Therefore, anything done in the body, even the most gross of sins, has no meaning because real life exists in the spiritual realm only. Well, you can see where this would be contrary to New Testament teaching and where it would cause a problem in churches. The second tenet was probably even more difficult to deal with because they believed only certain people had a higher truth. This privileged class, they're elevated, they had a deeper, higher knowledge of God. And can you see where that would cause a controversy in the church? Someone thought, hey, God's given me this special enlightenment. So some commentators will take the book of John and they'll say, well, this is what the problem is, and this is what he's writing about, and this is why there is animosity and hatred within the church because of this concept. But John never addresses the term Gnosticism, and maybe he is talking about that when he's talking about this division and this anger and this hatred in the church, but maybe not. I kind of lean to maybe not. He says, you have heard from the beginning. Now, John's not saying, hey, you've heard since the old law. He's not saying that. He's not saying, hey, this is what was taught, by our fathers. What he is saying is that you have heard from the beginning. It's what he's saying, hey, do you remember when Paul came to y'all? And, he had Timothy. What was one of the founding principles he taught you? One of the first principles of Christianity is what? Love. It's one of the founding principles. Faith, hope, love. The greatest of these is love. In a short period of time, if this book was directed to Ephesus or to a university, to any church, we do know that John later wrote in Revelation in chapter 2 that Ephesus had what? Left their first what? Love. He is telling them in a very short period of time, you've taken a principle that is the foundation and you have walked away from it. And you're not showing love. Now, they seem to have turned away from this first principle of Christianity, love. They seem to have forgotten a very important truth. Everyone who hates his brother is a murderer. Well, you may sit there and think, I don't hate anybody. Yes. But when you do not actively show love to your brethren, when you are indifferent to them, it's not something that you're motivated to do. It's just a generic principle that basically you might as well just what? You might as well just hate them. Indifference to our brethren, neglect, equates to murder. It equates, God sees it the same. It is an appeal, as John writes, that we have got to maintain this spirit of love among our brethren. And will there be division? Will there be strife? Well, yeah. Just read the New Testament. Read the letters. It's going to happen. But churches that love each other stay together and strong. Churches that are indifferent, brethren that are neglectful, it's going to cause division. And that's what John's message is to the churches that he wrote in the first century. And that's the message that he writes to us today. Jesus' love was active. It wasn't just, I love you, and he never showed it. Jesus' love was sacrificial. He was sacrificial on the cross. And I think what John is trying to tell us is you got to love each other. You got to love Jesus. And the way that you do that, it's not just a mental thought. It is something that you do. Christ showed his love for us. And if you appreciate that type of love that was shown upon the cross for you, then please come forward as we stand and sing.